They thought I was broke, penniless, pathetic. To my family, I was the failure, the one who never amounted to anything, the one they whispered about at reunions, the one they laughed at when they thought I couldn't hear. But the truth? The truth was burning in my chest like a secret too heavy to carry, because while they pitied me, mocked me, and tried to push me aside, I was quietly cashing their rent checks. Yes, the house they lived in, the shops they bragged about running, the offices they strutted through in their suits, all of it stood inside a building with my name on the deed. They thought I was broke. But I secretly owned the whole damn building. My name is Eleanor. I'm 68 years old now, and I've kept this story buried for decades. But sitting here today, sipping tea on the balcony that overlooks the street my family used to walk so proudly down, I think it's time to tell it. Not out of revenge, not even out of pride, but because maybe someone listening has felt what I felt. That burning shame of being underestimated, dismissed, treated like you're nothing, and I want you to know, nothing is ever as it seems. When I was younger, I wasn't the shining star of the family. My sister Margaret was. She married rich, wore pearls even to Sunday lunch, and never missed a chance to remind the rest of us how fortunate she was. My brother, David, built his own law practice, drove a Cadillac, and hosted dinners where he made a point to toast to hard work and success. And me? I was the widow, the quiet one, the one who lived in a modest apartment, wore hand-me-down coats, and always seemed to be behind on bills. Or so they thought. At family gatherings, I could feel their eyes on me. "Oh, Eleanor," Margaret would sigh, "you should really think about remarrying. A woman can't survive on her own." David would chuckle and add, "She can barely survive at all," and everyone would laugh. Even my cousins, even my nieces and nephews. I'd sit there, smile faintly, and stir my tea while my hands trembled under the table. Because the truth wasn't ready to come out yet. Not then. Here's what they never knew. When my husband died suddenly in 1985, God rest his soul, he didn't leave me much in savings. He wasn't a wealthy man, but he left me one thing that everyone else overlooked. A deed, a dusty, yellowed piece of paper tucked into a file box. At the time, it meant nothing to them. To me, it meant survival. That deed was to a 4-story brick building on Maple Avenue. Back then, it wasn't glamorous. Paint peeling, pipes leaking, half the units empty. Most people wouldn't have touched it with a 10-foot pole. But I held onto it like it was gold, because I knew one thing my siblings never understood. Property doesn't shrink. It doesn't vanish like stocks or flashy cars. It waits. It grows. It outlives arrogance. But of course, I never told them. You think I was going to sit at Sunday dinner while Margaret waved her diamond bracelet in my face and David bragged about his latest client, and just casually say, "Oh, by the way, I own the building you park your cars in"? No, I stayed silent. I let them believe what they wanted to believe. That I was the broke sister. The poor relation, the one they could push around. It hurt. God, did it hurt. To have the people who share your blood look at you like you're worth less than the table you're eating at. But here's the thing. Sometimes, silence is power. I remember one Thanksgiving in particular. We were all gathered at David's house. He had this sprawling dining room, long mahogany table, chandelier dripping with crystals. He liked to host because it gave him the chance to show off. The meal was grand. Roast turkey, glazed ham, 5 side dishes I can't even remember. But what I do remember is how, halfway through, Margaret leaned over with that smug little smile of hers and said, "Eleanor, darling, do you need us to slip you some money for rent again this month?" Everyone chuckled. Even the kids. They thought it was funny. I looked down at my plate, cut my turkey slowly, and just said, "I'll be fine." But inside, my heart burned. Because what Margaret didn't realize was that the mortgage she paid on her little boutique, it wasn't to the bank. It was to me. I'd watched them parade through life so sure of themselves, so dismissive of me. When David bragged about expanding his office, I quietly smiled, knowing his secretary dropped the rent envelope into my box every month. When Margaret held charity luncheons in her boutique, I passed by on the sidewalk, unnoticed, while her shop lights glowed in the windows I technically owned. They had no idea. And that was my greatest weapon. Still, Secrets are heavy. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I was wrong to keep it hidden. If I should have shouted it in their faces the first time they called me a failure. But something in me knew the time wasn't right. Because I didn't just want them to know. I wanted them to feel every ounce of the humiliation they'd poured on me, to taste their own arrogance, to choke on it. And one day, they would. Before I get ahead of myself, let me tell you what it's like to be underestimated by the people you love most. It chips away at you. Every snide comment, every patronizing pat on the hand, every whispered joke. It carves a scar on your soul. And yet, I smiled through it. I played the part, the broke sister, the weak widow, the poor aunt, because sometimes the best revenge is patience. That's how it all began. The deed in my drawer, the checks in my account, the secret in my chest, and the family who thought I was nothing, while living under the very roof I owned. But I promise you, the story doesn't end there, because eventually the truth came out, and when it did, it shattered everything they thought they knew. The years went on, and my silence became their entertainment. I can still hear the way my brother David would say it. Don't worry about Eleanor. She's harmless. She doesn't know how the world works. And then they'd laugh, clinking their glasses, filling the room with smugness. But let me ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated so badly that you almost wanted to thank the person for it? Because the more they dismissed me, the more invisible I became. And invisibility is a dangerous power. I kept my secret like a lover. That building, my building, was alive under my fingertips. I spent nights fixing leaky faucets, painting peeling walls, sitting with tenants when they couldn't pay on time. It was mine, not just in name, but in spirit. Yet in my family's eyes, I was the poor relation, begging scraps at their table. I remember once at Margaret's boutique, I stopped by to pick up a scarf I liked. She spotted me in the corner and her face lit up with that false sympathy I grew to despise. "Eleanor," she purred loud enough for the whole shop to hear. "Don't worry about the price. Just take it. Consider it a gift from your successful sister." The other customers turned to look at me. Their eyes said it all. Poor woman. Can't even afford a scarf. I smiled politely, thanked her, and walked out. But what Margaret never knew was that the very rent she paid to operate her precious boutique had just landed in my account. Her gift was nothing more than a fraction of what she already owed me. That was the game, year after year. They looked down on me, while I quietly held their strings. But the cruelest part wasn't the comments. It was how they excluded me. Family trips? I wasn't invited. Important gatherings? They forgot to call me. Inheritance talks, business expansions, even Christmas dinners. If they could avoid me, they did. To them, I wasn't family. I was charity, and in their arrogance, they built a prison of shame around me, brick by brick. But what they didn't know was that I was holding the key. Let me paint you a picture. It was Easter Sunday, a few years after my husband passed. We were at David's home again, all gathered for the holiday meal. His wife, Linda, was pouring wine into crystal glasses while Margaret arranged the ham like she owned the whole affair. David raised his glass. "To family?" he said with that rehearsed smile. Everyone echoed him, except me. Because as the crystal clinked, I couldn't stop thinking, you're toasting inside the walls I own. You're drinking beneath my roof. You're smiling at a table that only exists because I let it. And for the briefest moment, I almost laughed. But I swallowed it down. Not yet. Still, there were times I almost broke. One afternoon, Margaret pulled me aside. She lowered her voice and said, "Eleanor, I worry about you. People in town say you're living off scraps. If you're ever desperate enough, well, you can always come work at my shop. I'll find something for you. Maybe sweeping floors. In the very shop she leased from me." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the deed in her face and watch her crumble. But I didn't. I just said, "Thank you, Margaret." That's very kind. Because patience, my dear, is a blade sharper than rage. And then came the betrayals. There was a day when David called me out of the blue. His voice was unusually sweet. "Eleanor," he said, "I heard you're behind on your bills again. Why don't you sign over that old apartment of yours to me? I can manage it better than you. I'll make sure you're taken care of. I nearly dropped the phone. He wanted me to hand him the very property he'd been paying rent for years, without knowing it. Oh, David, I whispered. That's thoughtful. I'll consider it. He hung up, convinced he'd soon add another feather to his cap. But I just sat there, laughing into the silence. The audacity didn't stop there. One summer, when I couldn't make it to a family picnic, Margaret announced to everyone that she was worried I might end up homeless. Homeless. She said it right there, in front of my nieces and nephews. They pitied me, avoided my gaze, and whispered as I walked into the park with my basket of food. And do you know what stung most? It wasn't the whispers. It was the fact that no one defended me. Not one person stood up and said, "She's more than you think she is," because they all believed the same story, Eleanor, the broke widow. But oh, if only they knew. Do you know what kept me going through those humiliations? The knowledge of what was coming. Because I knew, sooner or later, the truth had to break through. Secrets don't stay buried forever. I imagined the scene over and over. How they'd look when they realized. The silence that would fall across the table. The shock that would twist their faces. And sometimes, late at night, I'd whisper to myself, one day, they'll beg me. And I'll remind them of every word they ever said. The chance came sooner than I expected. It started with the building itself. Maple Avenue was no longer the shabby street of the 80s. By the 2000s, it had blossomed into a thriving part of town. Cafes, galleries, boutiques. Rent skyrocketed, and so did the value of my building. Suddenly, that dusty deed my husband left me was worth millions. But of course, my family had no clue. They were too busy mocking me to notice the skyline changing around them, and then came the moment that cracked everything open. David decided to expand his law firm again. He wanted the space above Margaret's boutique, my space. One Sunday, over dinner, he casually said, "Margaret, if I buy the whole building, I'll let you keep your shop. Maybe even at a discount." The table roared with laughter. Margaret preened, proud of her brother's success. And me? I nearly choked on my wine. Buy the building? The building he already rented from me? The building I owned, free and clear? I held my tongue. But inside, I knew. The storm was about to break. Because here's the truth. Secrets aren't meant to last forever. And my family's arrogance had finally cornered me into the perfect moment. I didn't have to reveal it yet. But oh, I wanted to. Desperately. Because their downfall was sitting in my desk drawer, stamped, signed, and notarized. And when the day came to put it on the table, I promise you, the silence was sweeter than any applause I've ever heard. The moment came like thunder, not in the way I had rehearsed in my head 1,000 times, but in a way that left every mouth at the table hanging open. It was Margaret's idea to hold a family meeting. She loved her theatrics. She gathered us in her boutique one Sunday afternoon, polished to perfection with glass counters and racks of silk. She said it was to discuss the future of the family. What she meant was David's expansion. He stood there in his tailored suit, pacing like a king about to divide his kingdom. "I've been in talks with the owner of this building," he announced grandly. "And once I secure the purchase, Margaret, you'll have lifetime rights to keep your shop right here. Consider it a gift." "A gift," Margaret clapped. The cousins murmured admiration. Linda, his wife, beamed like she had married a genius. And then David said it, words that carved themselves into my memory. "All that's left is for the current owner to finally sign the papers. The poor soul has no idea how to manage property. They'll be relieved to hand it off to someone like me." I froze. The air thickened. Relieved? Poor soul? He was talking about me. It was Margaret who noticed my silence. She turned, that familiar smirk on her lips, and said, "Don't worry, Eleanor. When David owns the building, maybe he'll give you a little corner room. You won't have to worry about rent anymore." Laughter erupted like a cruel chorus. And that's when something inside me snapped. For decades I had swallowed their words. I had smiled through humiliation, played the part of the poor widow, Let them build their empire of arrogance on the assumption that I was nothing. But not today. Not anymore. I reached into my purse. My hand trembled, not from fear but from the weight of the moment. I pulled out a thick, worn folder, and I placed it on the glass counter between us. David frowned. "What's this?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence hang. I let them lean in, curious, irritated. Then I said it, the words that rewrote the entire history of our family in one breath. "It's the deed to this building." They blinked, confused. Margaret laughed nervously. "What are you talking about, Eleanor?" I met her eyes, and I smiled for the first time in years. Not the timid smile of survival, but the fierce smile of truth. "I'm the owner. Have been for decades. Every check you've written, every rent you've paid, every time you bragged about your success under this roof. It was mine. All of it." The silence that followed could have cracked glass. David's face drained of color. Margaret's jaw actually dropped, something I'd never seen before. Linda's wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. My nieces and nephews just stared, wide-eyed, like children who had just learned Santa Claus wasn't real. And me? I stood taller than I ever had in my life. David tried to recover first. He straightened, adjusted his tie, and scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. You don't have the resources to—" I slid the notarized documents across the counter. "Read it," he did. His hands shook as he flipped through page after page. His lips moved silently over the legal jargon, but the truth was undeniable. Finally, he slammed the folder shut and hissed, This must be a mistake." I tilted my head. "No mistake. My husband left it to me, and I've managed it just fine without your interference. In fact, you've been paying me rent for nearly 20 years, David. Every month, faithfully." The room gasped. Margaret sputtered, her face blotchy with rage. "You mean to tell me, my boutique? All these years?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Every ribbon you sold, every luncheon you hosted, every charity gala you flaunted, happened in my building. On my terms." She staggered back like I'd struck her. The beauty of that moment was not just in their shock. It was in the reversal. For years they had laughed at me. Pitying, mocking, dismissing, and now their laughter was gone, replaced by stunned silence. They didn't just look at me differently. They saw me for the first time. David's anger boiled over. He slammed his fist on the counter. "You should have told us. We could have expanded years ago." I raised an eyebrow. "And why would I? So you could take it from me, like you tried with my apartment?" His mouth opened, then closed. He had no answer. For the first time in our lives, David Randall, the great lawyer, the golden boy, the family's pride, was speechless. Margaret tried a different tactic. She softened her voice, pasted on a trembling smile. "Eleanor, darling, we're family. If you had just told us, we could have worked together, shared resources, helped each other," I laughed. A sharp, bitter laugh that cut the air like glass. "Family? You mean the same family that left me out of trips? That offered me pity jobs sweeping floors in my own building? That told people I might end up homeless?" Her smile faltered. I leaned closer, my voice low but strong. "No, you don't get to rewrite history now. You don't get to call it help when all you ever did was humiliate me." The room was suffocating with silence. No one dared move. And then, because pride is poison, David snapped. "Well," he sneered, "if you own the building, then maybe you'd better think twice about raising the rent on your only family, because we won't stay where we're not respected." I held his gaze, and I said the words that burned through every scar they had ever left on me. "Then don't. Pack your things. Move out." The gasp that followed was like music. Margaret clutched her pearls. "You wouldn't dare." I straightened. "Oh, I would. And I will. Starting next month, both of you will find your leases terminated. Consider it my gift. You always said I had nothing. Now you'll see what it feels like." It was chaos after that. David shouting, Margaret crying, the cousins whispering in disbelief. But I was calm, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the broke sister. I wasn't the widow to be pitied. I wasn't their joke. I was the owner, the landlord, the silent queen they never saw coming. That night when I got home, I sat at my kitchen table with the deed in front of me. My hand still trembled, but this time from release. Decades of humiliation had just unraveled in one afternoon. And the look on their faces, oh, the look, was worth every moment of silence I had endured. But the story wasn't over. Because when the dust settled, when the shouting stopped, when they finally accepted the truth, that's when the real reckoning began. And let me tell you, the aftermath was almost sweeter than the reveal itself. The days after the reveal were unlike anything I'd lived before. For decades, I had been invisible. Now suddenly, I was all they could see. The phone rang constantly. Margaret sobbing, begging me to reconsider. David, angry at first, then bargaining. He even showed up at my apartment one evening with flowers, as if roses could erase decades of scorn. Eleanor, he said, his voice sickly sweet. We're stronger together. Imagine what we could build as a family. I looked at the flowers, then at him, and for a moment, I almost pitied him. But then I remembered the Thanksgiving when they laughed at me, the whispers in the park, the pity job offer. I closed the door and left him standing in the hallway. Here's the thing about power. When you finally hold it, you realize you don't need to scream or fight or prove yourself anymore. The proof is in the silence that follows when truth lands, and my silence spoke louder than all their years of arrogance combined. Margaret tried another angle. She invited me to tea, set the table with her finest china, poured me a cup with trembling hands. I didn't mean it, Eleanor, she whispered. All those years. I was just joking. I stirred my tea slowly. Were you joking when you told people I might end up homeless? Were you joking when you offered me a job sweeping floors in your shop? Were you joking when you laughed while David called me a failure? Her lips quivered. She didn't answer, because she knew the truth, and for once I didn't need her apology. I had something far better, the knowledge that every stitch of fabric hanging in her boutique depended on me. But power wasn't just about revenge. It was about choice, and here was my choice. I didn't raise their rents. I didn't evict them. Not yet. Instead, I let them live with the truth. Every month as they wrote those checks, they had to remember. Every time they walked into that building, they had to face it. The walls they mocked me under belonged to me. That was the sweetest punishment of all. I won't pretend it was easy. The scars they left didn't vanish overnight. There were still nights I lay awake, wondering why family can cut deeper than any stranger. Because here's a truth I've learned after nearly 7 decades of living. Strangers may hurt you. But family has the map to your soul. They know exactly where to strike, and mine had struck me over and over again. But here I was, still standing, stronger than they ever imagined. Do you know what happened after the reveal? The cousins, those who had whispered and laughed, suddenly wanted to sit with me. Call me, ask my advice. Funny, isn't it? How quickly respect grows when money is involved. How fast poor Eleanor became Aunt Eleanor, the wise one. But I didn't let it poison me, because deep down, I knew who I was long before the building made it undeniable. There was one moment that sealed it for me. I was walking past Margaret's boutique one afternoon. She was in the window arranging a display. When she saw me, she froze. For the first time, her eyes didn't carry that smug superiority. They carried fear and something else. Something I had never seen in her. Respect. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need their love. I didn't need their validation. All I needed was the knowledge that I had survived them. And not just survived, triumphed. Now, as I sit here decades later, the building still stands. Taller, prouder, filled with life. Tenants come and go. Businesses rise and fall. And my family? They've scattered. Some still rent space inside. Others left long ago, unable to bear the reminder. But the truth remains carved into every brick. The woman they called broke, weak, worthless, was the one holding the foundation beneath their feet. So here's my lesson. If you've stayed with me this long, never let anyone else write your story for you. People will call you names. They'll label you, mock you, underestimate you. They'll build a prison out of their words and try to lock you inside. But you hold the key. Sometimes it takes patience. Sometimes it takes silence. But when the time comes, The truth will roar louder than any insult. And when it does, you'll stand taller than you ever thought possible. I kept my secret for decades. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew. Revenge isn't always about striking back. Sometimes revenge is just living long enough to let the truth reveal itself. And oh, when it does, the silence is golden. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been made to feel small, I want you to remember my story. Because no matter how invisible you feel right now, one day they'll see. And when they do, you won't even need to raise your voice. Thank you for listening to me. And if this story spoke to you, if you've ever carried a secret strength they didn't see, leave a comment and tell me. I'd love to hear it. Because none of us are as weak as they think we are. And sometimes the quietest people hold the loudest truths. They thought I was broke. But I was the one who owned the building. And that secret carried me further than their arrogance ever could. So the next time someone laughs at you, dismisses you, underestimates you, just smile. Because maybe, just maybe, you're the one holding the deed.